The air was thick with a stillness that felt both unnatural and promising as I stood atop the ridge overlooking the city. Below, the capital stretched out like a living tapestry, its spires and rooftops drenched in the soft glow of dawn. The wariness that usually clung to the streets seemed to have lifted, replaced by something more tentative, a fragile hope that whispered of change. I breathed deeply, the cool morning air filling my lungs, carrying faint scents of damp earth and blooming jasmine from the gardens below. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the world was not trembling on the edge of disaster. Behind me, the ragged edges of the fate market stirred to life. The shadows that had once seemed so permanent now felt less like chains and more like the remnants of a storm slowly passing. Ira was already waiting at the base of the hill, her fiery hair catching the light as she paced, restless but resolute. When I descended to meet her, her sharp green eyes held a rare softness. "It's happening," she said quietly, her voice laced with disbelief and hope. "The prophecy isn't unraveling the world, it's healing it." We moved through the winding alleys beneath the market's towering structures, entering the chamber where Master Orin had taken refuge. The dim light flickered against the ancient stone walls, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the uncertainty of what was to come. Orin sat near the hearth, his silver hair catching the firelight, eyes clouded but clear with purpose. He gestured for me to sit beside him, his presence a steady anchor in the swirling chaos. "The silence of the divine has begun to wane," he murmured, his voice a fragile thread in the quiet room. "What you have done, Kayla, has shifted the currents of fate. The threads are not severed, but rewoven. The future is no longer dictated by prophecy alone, but by the courage to choose differently." His words settled over me like a bomb, yet the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on my shoulders. Redemption was no longer a distant dream, but an urgent mandate. I was not merely an oracle who predicted fate. I was now a guardian of possibility. Outside, Joran weaved through the market's bustling heart, carrying tidings of subtle transformations. The factions that had once vied for dominance now hesitated, their ambitions tempered by the emerging new order. Whispers of peace and reform fluttered through the streets like tentative wings, fragile but persistent. Back in the chamber, Ira and I pored over reports and messages, piecing together the mosaic of change. Each fragment told a story of a world cautiously stepping away from the brink. Yet, beneath the surface, old wounds and mistrust remained, reminders that the path ahead would not be without peril. As the day wore on, I felt the stirring of a new purpose within me. The prophecy I had once sold, the one that had brought ruin, was no longer a chain but a key to unlock a future shaped by choice rather than fate. The silence that had haunted me was no longer an absence but a space for new voices, including my own, to rise. Nightfall brought a gathering beneath the open sky, where allies and tentative friends came together. Their faces were etched with the scars of loss and the glimmers of hope. We spoke quietly of rebuilding, of protecting the delicate balance we had fought so hard to restore. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was ours to walk. As I looked up at the stars, their pale light filtering through the dark velvet of night, I felt a fragile promise take root within me. The future was unbound, no longer written in shadows cast by past mistakes, but illuminated by the courage to face what lay ahead. This was not the end of my story, but the beginning of a new chapter, one where hope and redemption intertwined, where fate was a thread to be woven, not a chain to be broken. The world was shifting beneath my feet, and I was ready to lead it into the dawn. But even as the silence lifted, the question lingered in my mind. How long could this fragile hope endure before the shadows returned? The answer, like the future itself was yet unwritten. The chill of early morning clung to the air as I approached the familiar yet distant silhouette of my childhood home. The ancient willow tree stood sentinel, its leaves whispering with the breeze, shadows stretching long and thin across the worn path. Every step I took toward that threshold was a step through a labyrinth of memories, some tender, many fractured by years of silence and regret. My heart thudded unevenly, a chaotic rhythm against the steady pulse of the waking world. I paused beneath the willow's boughs, the late afternoon sun casting a golden haze that softened the edges of my doubts. The air smelled faintly of earth and rain, grounding me in a moment far removed from the turmoil of the fate market and the heavy weight of prophecies sold and lost. Here, I was not an oracle, not a pariah, but a daughter returning to a past I had long avoided. The door creaked open before I could knock, and there she stood, my mother, her eyes cautious, yet shimmering with a fragile hope. The years etched delicately into her features had softened the sharp lines I remembered from my youth. For a moment, the silence stretched, filled only by the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a crow. Then, slowly, she stepped aside, a silent invitation to cross the threshold. Inside, the house held the scent of aged wood and fading memories. We sat opposite one another, the space between us heavy with unspoken apologies and tentative forgiveness. Words faltered at first, like fragile threads struggling to weave a new tapestry from the tattered remnants of our past. Yet, as sunlight waned to twilight, a quiet understanding blossomed, a shared recognition that while the past could not be rewritten, the future remained a canvas yet untouched. In the days that followed, I sought counsel not from the faded scrolls or whispered prophecies, but from within. Master Orin's words echoed in my mind. The silence of the divine is not absence, but invitation. Trust what you carry inside, Kayla. The future is not etched in stone, but shaped by the courage to choose. Meeting him in his modest chamber, surrounded by relics of a time before the fate market's corruption, I found solace in his steady gaze and cryptic guidance. His presence was a balm to the wounds carved by betrayal and loss, a reminder that wisdom often dwells in silence and that strength arises from embracing uncertainty. Alongside me, Era remained an unwavering beacon, a flame of loyalty and fierce pragmatism. Our rare moments of laughter amidst the tense negotiations to reform the fate market breathed life into weary bones. Her fiery hair and piercing green eyes mirrored my own storm-grey gaze, a silent testament to resilience forged in the crucible of hardship. Together, we navigated the shifting currents of power and greed, pushing for a future where prophecies would no longer be commodities but sacred gifts to guide rather than enslave. The road was perilous, strewn with threats, cloaked in smiles and alliances as fragile as glass. Yet with each step, I felt the chains of my past loosen, replaced by a growing conviction that destiny was a thread I could weave anew. One dawn, as the first light spilled over the city skyline, I stood atop the hill overlooking the waking streets. The fragile threads of destiny shimmered faintly before me, no longer shackles but strands of possibility. The silence of the divine lingered not as an ending, but as a quiet promise of mysteries yet to unfold. In that moment, I embraced the uncertainty, the pain, and the hope intertwined within me. I was no longer merely a victim of fate's cruel design, but a woman reclaiming her voice, ready to face a future unbound by prophecy's shadow. The new dawn was not just the breaking of day, but the awakening of choice, courage, and the fragile, unyielding light of hope. Yet, as the city stirred to life below, a question lingered at the edge of my thoughts. How long could this fragile balance hold in a world still hungry for control? The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I walked it not with dread, but with resolve. The threads were mine to weave, and the story was far from over. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and old wood as I stood before the familiar, yet foreign, threshold of my childhood home. The years away had carved lines in the once gleaming doorframe, and the faded paint whispered stories of neglect and endurance. My heart thudded unevenly, a mix of dread and fragile hope knotting my insides. The world outside had been a tempest chaos spun from my own failures, and the prophecy I'd sold like a cursed relic. Yet here I was, seeking the warmth of ties I had long severed. The door creaked open, revealing my mother's silhouette framed by golden candlelight. Her eyes, sharp and wary as ever, scanned me with the weight of unspoken grievances and years of silence. The silver threads woven through her dark hair caught the light, softening her stern features just enough to remind me of the woman who had once cradled me through nightmares and dreams alike. "Kayla," she said, voice trembling between reprimand and relief. "You've come back." Words caught in my throat as I nodded, stepping inside the dim hallway where memories clung like dust motes. The scent of dried lavender and herbs her constant companions filled the space, a balm to the raw ache of estrangement. I hadn't expected forgiveness, only a chance to begin. Before long, I found myself in the flickering glow of the hearth, where my younger brother awaited his presence, a tentative bridge to a past I had almost abandoned. His clear blue eyes held questions and cautious welcome, and when he smiled, it was as if the sun had broken through a long winter's cloud. "It's been too long," he admitted quietly. "Too long," I echoed, feeling the weight of every lost year settle between us. But reconciliation was not a gift freely given. It was a fragile thread we both had to weave anew. We spoke in halting truths and shared silences, unearthing the fractures time had deepened but not shattered. In that room, warmed by firelight and fragile hope, I began to reclaim parts of myself I thought forever lost. Yet, even as the night softened old wounds, the world beyond my family's doorstep remained a tempest. The fate market churned with whispers and shadows, and I was not alone in facing its storms. In a dim corner of a bustling tavern, I met with Ira and Jorin, my steadfast allies in this treacherous dance. Their faces, etched by hardship and resolve, reflected the grim reality of our mission. "The auction draws near," Ira murmured, her green eyes sharp beneath a hood. Malrek's grip tightens. Joran leaned in, voice low but urgent. "There's talk of new players, mercenaries, spies. The market's pulse quickens." Together, we pored over scraps of information and half-truths, weaving a tapestry of plans and contingencies. The murmur of the tavern was a low hum beneath our whispered strategies, a reminder that every move we made rippled through unseen channels. But, amidst the scheming and shadows, moments of quiet light found me. One afternoon, by the riverbank where sunlight danced on rippling water, my younger brother and I shared a tentative laugh. The breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh earth, and for a fleeting moment, the weight of prophecy and peril lifted. "You always were stubborn," he teased, nudging me gently. "But maybe that's what we need." I smiled, the warmth of that fragile bond anchoring me. Perhaps yet, as dusk settled and the world grew silent, I found myself alone in my chambers. The worn edges of a faded family portrait caught my fingers as I traced the faces of those I'd once held dear. The silence was heavy, an echo of the divine quiet that had shadowed my path, but also comforting in its constancy. In that solitude, I understood that unseen bonds tethered me still to past mistakes, to those I loved, and to a future uncertain but not unshaped. These connections, fragile yet unyielding, would be the foundation upon which I would rebuild not only my life but the fate of a world teetering on the edge. Tomorrow the auction would come, and with it the promise of confrontation and choice. But tonight I allowed myself a breath, a moment to gather strength from the ties I had dared to mend. The road ahead was daunting, but no longer would I walk it alone. Unseen bonds, once broken and buried, were now threads of hope weaving through the tapestry of my destiny. And in that hope, I found the courage to face the shadows yet to come. As the candle's flame flickered low, a single thought anchored my restless mind. The future was not written in stone, but in the hands of those brave enough to grasp the pen, and I would be one of them. The night deepened, and outside my window the city whispered its secrets. Somewhere in the twisting alleys and hidden chambers of the fate market, the wheels of destiny turned, inexorable yet malleable. I lay awake, listening to the silence that spoke louder than any prophecy, feeling the unseen bonds that tethered me to both past and future. Tomorrow the dance would continue, but tonight I was home at least in Parton. That was a beginning. The threads were fragile, yes, but they were mine to weave, and I would not let them unravel. The future awaited, uncertain and unbound, and I was ready to face it whatever shadows it might cast. The wind swept across the hilltop, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and the distant murmur of the waking city beneath. Kayla Very stood solitary, the weight of the world pressing softly against her shoulders as the last light of day bled into twilight. Her storm-grey eyes traced the delicate web of streets and spires, each thread a story, a future, a fragile possibility hanging in balance. The orange glow painted her face in hues of fire and shadow, mirroring the turmoil within. For a long moment, she simply breathed, the silence around her a balm after the cacophony of the fate market's machinations. This was a rare respite, one she both craved and feared. Rest was a luxury she had long been denied, and yet in this quiet hour, the truth of her journey settled like dust on ancient stone. Hope was not a gift granted by prophecy or divine decree. It was a choice. Her thoughts drifted to Master Orin, the elder seer whose cryptic lessons had haunted her dreams and guided her steps. His voice, low and resonant, echoed within her mind. Hope is a fragile flame, Kayla. It does not burn without fuel. It requires tending, even in the darkest night. Those words had felt like a riddle then, but now, standing here, they were a call to arms of a different kind. Behind her, footsteps approached light, purposeful. Ira Thane emerged from the shadows, her fiery red hair ablaze against the dimming sky. The fierce green in her eyes was tempered with a rare softness as she joined Kayla at the edge of the hill. "You've been out here a long time," Ira said, voice low but steady, the market stirring. "There's talk of unrest, but also something else, a flicker of change." Kayla nodded, turning to face her companion. "Change is a thread we must weave carefully. Hope without action is just wishful thinking. But with it, we might yet hold the future in our hands." Ira smiled faintly, the tension in her posture easing. "Then we keep tending that flame, together." Their conversation was brief, but charged with unspoken promises. Plans formed quietly between them, alliances to fortify, secrets to unearth, battles both political and personal to be fought. The fate market was a living beast, its pulse erratic but not yet broken. Within its shadows and glittering halls, hope flickered not as a naive dream, but as a determined force, stubborn and resilient. Later, in the hush of her chamber, Kayla lit a single candle. The flame danced and stretched, casting warm light over the cryptic symbols she had sketched absent-mindedly earlier. She cupped her hands around it, feeling the heat, the life within. Master Oren's final lesson came to her again, not just words, but a living truth. The silence of the divine was not emptiness, but a space to fill with choice, courage, and care. Outside, the city began to stir in earnest. The Fate Market streets buzzed with a new energy, wary but hopeful. Faces once shadowed by fear now bore tentative smiles. Whispers carried not just greed, but the promise of something different. Kayla sensed the shifting tides and the fragile dawn of possibility, though the future remained unwritten and the shadows long. Kayla Varys stood ready not as a broken oracle defined by past mistakes, but as a guardian of what could still be. The echoes of hope were faint, but they were there, resounding in every quiet act of courage, every thread of destiny she sought to protect. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Kayla turned from the window, her resolve crystallizing like the morning frost. The path ahead would be wrought with peril and sacrifice, but it was hers to walk, and with hope as her guide, she would face whatever shadows lurked in the coming days. With a final glance at the flickering flame, she whispered into the silence, "This time, I will not let fate write me down without a fight." The fragile threads of tomorrow trembled, but they held, and so did she. The markets would awaken soon. The auctions would continue. The dance of prophecy and power would never cease. But somewhere deep inside, a new story was beginning, one written not in shadows of despair, but in the light of hope reclaimed. Keller's story was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The chamber was steeped in shadows, flickering candlelight casting wavering shapes upon cracked stone walls. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense, mingling with the faint musk of aged parchment and worn wood. Kayla sat cross-legged opposite Master Oren, her storm-grey eyes fixed on the elder seer's lined face, where years of wisdom and sorrow mingled in equal measure. The silence between them was profound, a tangible force pressing in, yet it was not empty rather. It was a silence pregnant with meaning. Master Oren's voice finally broke the quiet, low and gravelly, carrying the weight of decades. "Kayla, the silence you have feared is not a void but a crucible. The divine does not speak in words for us to cling to, but in silence for us to create meaning from." Keller's brow furrowed, the familiar ache of uncertainty stirring within her. "But Master, if the divine is silent, how do we choose? How do we know which thread to follow when all futures are veiled?" The old seer smiled faintly, a gesture both sad and serene. "The silence is not absence, but invitation. It is the space where free will and fate entwine. You have learned that prophecy is not a chain, but a key, and now you must forge your own path with it." She absorbed his words, feeling the tension within her ease just slightly. The burden of past mistakes, the crushing weight of lost destinies, had long held her captive. Yet here, in this quiet chamber, a new understanding began to take root. The silence she had once interpreted as divine abandonment was, in truth, a sacred portion, opening for her to reclaim her voice and agency. Master Oren reached out, his frail hand resting briefly over hers. "I have given you what guidance I could, but the rest lies with you. Remember, the future is not written in stone, nor in shadows, but in the courage to face the unknown." As the first pale light of dawn crept through the narrow window, Kayla rose. The quiet promise of morning whispered through the air, carrying with it a fragile hope. She stepped outside into the cool embrace of daybreak, the sky painted in hues of soft pink and gold. The world was still waking, wrapped in silence and possibility. She knelt on the dew-laden earth, fingers tracing a new symbol in the dirt, a mark of renewal and determination. The lines were imperfect, but they pulsed with purpose. Around her, the leaves rustled softly in a sudden breeze, nature's quiet applause to her rebirth. In that moment, Kayla felt the heavy chains of her past fall away, replaced by a steady flame of resolve. The silence of the divine was no longer a void to fear, but a canvas upon which she would paint the future. She was no longer the broken oracle haunted by failure. She was a guardian of fate, a beacon of fragile hope amid shadows. Behind her, Master Orin watched with a cryptic smile, his eyes reflecting both sorrow for what had been lost and hope for what might yet be. Their journey was far from over, but Kayla was ready. The silent promise was hers to keep, and with it, the courage to face whatever tomorrows awaited. The faint stirrings of the fate market echoed in the distance, a reminder of the world she was bound to protect. But now, she would walk its twisting paths, not as a victim of prophecy, but as its master, weaving destiny with every choice she made. And as the sun rose higher, casting light on the fragile threads of fate, Kayla Varys stepped forward into the unknown, unbound and unafraid, ready to write the future in shadows and hope alike. The silence lingered, but it was no longer empty. It was a promise,